Chapter 2, Learning Knowledge Overview. This chapter introduces some of the key issues and strategies for learning. Knowledge. We discuss the different types of knowledge and tips for improving. You are learning based on what we know about how memory works. Finally, we'll discuss different learning environments and how to make best use of them. Introduction. There is one thing that we can be pretty sure about, that you are intelligent. You did well at school, and some of you will have relied on a good memory but not a great deal of study to pass your exams. Unfortunately, medical school is not like secondary school. The curriculum is not as clearly set as for our levels, and it has a tendency to change a little while you are still trying to follow it. The volume of work is huge, too big for even the best minds to hold without effort, and too much information to cram into your head the week before the exam. The source of knowledge might be different too. You might have been told what to learn at school, learn the classes, and do the set homework, and you will do well at most secondary schools. In medicine, you will not get taught everything that you need to know, and yet you will still be expected to learn it too. Work out what you need to learn, to work out ways of learning it, to work out ways of knowing when you have learnt it, and to get on and learn it. This drastic change of emphasis comes as a culture shock to many. This chapter highlights some of the issues with learning in medical school and looks to established theories from educational psychology and established study skills techniques to make your learning as efficient and effective as possible. There are some key messages running through this chapter which might be worth highlighting here. Learning to learn effectively and efficiently, like any other skill, requires deliberate and reflective effort over time. If you want to learn a new way of learning, it will take 3 months or so of practice before you become fluent. If you invest time and effort now, these skills will stay with you and help you for the rest of your life. There is no end to what you could learn in medicine, so you will need to learn what is important and when you can tell you know enough about a subject. The only way to survive the load of learning at medical school is through regular, active, self-directed learning. It is probably possible to pass the exams in the first 2 years of most curricula by cramming if you have a good memory, but it won't be possible after this, and your knowledge will be seriously deficient. Start studying for being a doctor from week 1 of your course. Spend time not only thinking about what you are learning, but also how you are learning, what works for you, what works for this task. How could you improve your learning? Learning in medicine is a lifelong process. Medical school is just the start. You might as well try and get the foundations right. How do I know what to learn? Medical education is unlike other types of higher education. Medicine has no start and no end, and it is close to impossible to define exactly the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are required to be a doctor. Medicine is rapidly changing, so by the time you get to the end of a 4, 5, or 6-year curriculum, exactly what you need to be able to know and to be able to do will have changed. Understandably, students struggle and stress trying to find out what they are expected to know, and this section aims to give some pointers on how to find out. The bad news is that there isn't one published list of what is needed to make a good doctor, but the good news is that there are plenty of pointers out there. You'll need to make some judgments about what you want and need to learn, but for the rest of your professional life, you'll need to make those judgments, so it's not a bad habit to get into. Your medical school is likely to publish a curriculum listing core required knowledge in one form or another, and this should provide you with some guidance. It might change and more. Importantly, it might not reflect what you need to know to be a safe and effective doctor, so you will need to spend some time considering what else you should know and to what depth. Textbooks are handy looking through. The table of contents of a medium-sized core text will give you a good idea, as will looking through the index of some thin undergraduate books. You might want to look at both clinical books and basic science books, as you will be expected to learn hard science and its clinical application, self-directed versus teacher-directed learning. In some secondary schools, the teaching is excellent. You were taught what you needed to know to do well in your exams. Learn your lessons, do your set work well, and you did well in your GCSEs and in your levels. Medicine is different. You will need to learn to take control of your own learning. After all, this is how you will be learning for the rest of your professional life as a doctor. Keep a notebook or a section of your diary where you can jot down things you want to look up and set aside regular time to do so. These might be things that you think are important for exams or for your practice as a doctor, or they might be things that you find interesting and might make you a more rounded doctor. Just learning the taught components of your course and doing the set. Assignments will not be enough to become a good doctor. I prefer to be taught things and have always gone to teachers to find things out. It was a real culture shock at my medical school when they just replied, "How are you going to look that up?" Sometimes I wish they would just. Fitch Mill, Catriona, first year medical student. Binge learning versus regular learning. There is no way of escaping it. You will need to develop a habit of regular, self-directed learning. Our chapter 8 on life, work balance covers this in more depth. You might in the past have crammed for exams, and your memory might be such that you can memorize a whole lot of facts and hold them in your memory for a week or two. There are three problems with doing this in medicine. First, the volume of facts will become too great to hold. At some point you will not be able to manage, and at that point you will realize that you are actually years behind in your knowledge. Second, you will not be asked to just regurgitate facts. Instead, you will be asked to apply knowledge. You need a deep level of understanding to be able to do this, and cramming doesn't give you that kind of level. Finally, and most importantly, you are not studying to pass exams, you are studying to be a doctor. Cramming information in your head just before an exam and forgetting it shortly after will not help you care for patients regardless of whether you passed. You will need a diary and a timetable, and you will need to plan regular, self-directed learning, some of which will involve looking up new topics, and some of which will involve reviewing your previous learning to consolidate it into long-term memory. If you get into good habits early in the course, they will pay major dividends during the course and long after. Lifelong learning and continuing professional development. The phrase lifelong learning is a bit of a mantra in higher education and gets brought out at every opportunity. Skipping all the rhetoric, as a doctor you need to continue learning all the time, day in, day out for the rest of your professional life. For the vast majority of the time, no one will tell you what you need to learn. You will need to know what you do know what you don't know, prioritize what you need to know, or what you might need to know difficult if you have a tendency to be indecisive. Work out a way of learning it, and work out a way of knowing when you know enough on that topic and can move on. Appraisals, some curricular, your mentors and drug reps touting their wares might all help you, but the emphasis will always come down to you. One of your aims at medical school has to be to learn how to learn and learn how to continue to learn to keep up to date. It is daunting, but actually it's fun too. Depth versus breadth. Here is a key issue that students struggle with. One student we worked with had a tendency to always study to far too great a depth. She was working with a group of others close to finals, and they agreed to go away and study liver disease over the next 2 days and then come back and test each other. This student became lost in the molecular pathology of primary biliary cirrhosis, finding deeper and deeper books to go into and never got to read about gallstones. It would be possible to study for a PhD on the molecular pathology of this rare condition and still not understand it completely. As a doctor, it is not a condition that you are likely to see often, let alone need to know the molecular pathology of it. On the flip side of the coin, we have also seen plenty of students who do the opposite. They buy the thinnest books possible and can write 2 lines on any condition in medicine, only 2 lines though. Figure 2.1 Planning Self-Directed Learning. What don't I know about this topic? What do I need to learn? How can I learn what I need to learn? How will I know when I have learnt it adequately? What do I know about this topic? Working out to what depth you need to learn is a difficult balancing act. You cannot and will not ever know everything, and yet you probably want to. No more than the minimum. Throughout the rest of this chapter, we try and give tips on different ways you might check that you are working to an appropriate depth. I really like to understand things fully. Sometimes I spend hours and hours on one small thing, looking in the library and on the net to try and understand it completely. I ran out of time in my revision and did badly. In my first year exams, I think I learned my lesson. Demetrius, second year medical student. One answered Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom made a name for himself leading a group of educational psychologists in an attempt to define different levels of knowledge in order to guide students in their examiners. He defined 7 levels of knowledge, which are often used religiously by educationalists. Figure 2.2 Finding the right depth. The study too can be difficult. Table 2.1 Bloom's Levels of Knowledge. Knowledge you know enough to be able to recite knowledge by rote. Comprehension you understand the knowledge so can explain it to others. Application you can use the knowledge you have to solve. Problems you use your knowledge of clubbing to try and work out why the patient in front of you has clubbed fingers. Analysis you can use the knowledge you have to compare and contrast with other knowledge and see how it fits in with other people's assumptions and or hypotheses. For examples, compare and contrast type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Compare and contrast the electron as a particle and the electron as an electromagnetic wave. Synthesis, you can use knowledge integrated with other knowledge to produce new hypotheses. For example, you know glucose crosses the placenta and that insulin does not. You know that in diabetes, glucose tends to run high, so you hypothesize that the baby of a woman with diabetes will produce high levels of insulin itself and so will be at risk of going hypo after birth. Evaluation, you use your knowledge to assess, critique, or judge others. As with any model, it isn't perfect, but it is particularly useful to help you think about their purpose and the depth of knowledge that you are learning. At medical school, you will be expected to learn knowledge at more than a basic level. You will be asked to apply your knowledge, use it to problem solve, use it to critique papers, and use it to hypothesize and create new ideas. Simply knowing and understanding will not be enough. Imagine that you are seeing a person with diabetes who has quite poor blood glucose control. Being able to recite a memorized list of causes for poor diabetic control is not going to help you very much. You will need to be able to take that knowledge, apply it, investigate what is going on for the patient, hypothesize which causes are most likely, test those hypotheses one way or another, and explain it all to the patient. Most of your exams will try and test these higher levels of knowledge, and when studying, you should use techniques to ensure that you are learning knowledge to this level. More of this comes later. Exercise. Look at the following exam questions. To what level of Bloom's taxonomy due? They assess knowledge. Q1. The following are causes of clubbing. Q2. A man presents with clubbing and jaundice. Which of the following are likely? Diagnosis. Q3. A man presents with clubbing and shortness of breath. Which one of the following? Investigations would be most appropriate. Q4. Critique the box what is clubbing and use your knowledge to suggest improvements. Normal finger, club finger. Figure 2.3. What is clubbing? Clubbing is a physical sign, a favorite of clinicians, where the bed of the nail is swollen so that the fingernail or toenail, rather than sliding downwards into the digit, looks like it slopes in the opposite direction. The mind, memory, and learning. Without wishing to upset all those neurophysiologists and neuropsychologists, no one really seems to understand how memory works. There are a couple of theories, though, borne out by experimental research, which do provide some pointers on how memory might work, particularly on how to maximize learning. Left brain, right brain. Positron emission tomography scans and functional magnetic resonance imaging scans, as well as older electrophysiology work, show that if you are right-handed, the left-hand side of your brain seems to relate to words, fact, logic, whereas the right-hand side deals much more with emotion, feelings, and imagery. The theory goes that if you use both halves of your brain while learning, you are more likely to remember. This seems true if you use as many senses and exaggeration and emotion when trying to learn something. You are more likely to remember it. One of the causes of clubbing is pus in the lungs. If you visualize someone with hugely clubbed fingers, imagine pus dripping out from their lungs through their chest wall, dripping on the floor. It makes you feel sick. It is green and smelly. Your imaginary person uses his or her clubbed fingernails to pick at the pus. Spend a moment imagining this. Run through all your senses and exaggerate them. What can you hear, smell, feel, taste, see? And do the same with your emotions. If you hold this image in your head and revisit it once or twice, you will never forget pus in the lung is a cause of clubbing. I really love using color and pictures. I remember things so much better when I can see them. Cyan, third-year medical student. The vaccination model of memory. As a healthcare professional, you will be vaccinated against hepatitis B. You will be given the first injection, and this will cause a minor immune reaction. Your antibodies will rise and then fall. When given a second injection, your immune memory will be heightened, the same with the third. So with each injection, your immune response and immune memory is strengthened. Not only are several injections better than one injection for strength and longevity of immune memory, but the timing also seems important. One injection today and the second in 5 years' time is likely to be pretty useless. There are parallels with memory, of course. If you learn a list of causes of clubbing and don't look at it for a year, you will be lucky if you can remember it. If you learn it now, review it in 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months' time, you will probably remember it for life. This is one of the reasons why most medical schools have exams frequently, and each exam will often cover the content of the last exam in addition to the learning you have done since then. This is to encourage you to revisit and review your learning on a regular basis. This has some practical implications for studying. Use your diary or timetable to mark down review sessions, perhaps one evening a week. Use this time to review notes that you made this week, 3 weeks ago, and 3 months ago. If you use active learning principles, you will be able to review your notes quickly and efficiently and extend your memory of the topics far beyond your peers. Semantic networks. One of the leading models of memory is that memories are encoded in networks. One item of knowledge is linked to other items of knowledge like some massive, messy spiral web with knowledge sitting at intersections of the silk and the web representing the links. Clubbing links to what you know about the anatomy of the fingers links to the possible diagnosis, each of which links to what you know about them. There is also probably now a link to a revolting image of past. Memory is therefore constructed by linking new learning with your prior knowledge, and the strength of a memory or of learning depends on the strength of those links. In turn, the strength of those links depends on how many times you use them. As an example, another cause of clubbing is inflammatory bowel disease, particularly two conditions called Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. You could try and learn that as an isolated fact, or you could link it in with what you know of bowel diseases. If when you learn about causes of diarrhea, you think about the features you will look for on examination, and when you read about the anatomy and histopathology of the bowel, you consider systemic manifestations of bowel disease, then that link between clubbing and inflammatory bowel diseases will be much stronger. And if you see a patient with clubbing, bowel disease will spring into your mind. Similarly, if you see a patient with Crohn's disease, you will know to look for clubbing. The relevance for your learning is that when learning new things, always try and build links with what you know already. This will strengthen both the new learning and your prior knowledge. Active learning, passive learning. Have you ever seen someone asleep over a book? I have a fantastic picture of my brother asleep on the sofa with a copy of the British National formulary covering his eyes. We labeled it learning by osmosis. Thinking about yourself, have you ever sat and stared at a page, read the same paragraph over and over before you realized that you hadn't taken in a word of it? We have seen plenty of students who sit and read books, look at the words, often spending many hours doing so, but then still don't seem to do well in the exams. Effective learning is an active process requiring effort and energy. The volume of learning required in medicine is so much that even those with outstanding memories will not be able to just soak it all up, and this will be a shock for many. Similarly, the fact that you will need to apply knowledge will mean that those who try and just learn flat facts to recall a paragraph or two of a core text will have a lot of trouble taking that knowledge and using it in other contexts. Tips for active learning. Before learning, ask questions. Why am I learning this? What will it tell me? How will I know? When I have learnt it, obtain an overview. Write down what you know already on some rough paper, perhaps as a brainstorm or concept map. Write down some key questions that you should be able to answer at the end of your learning. Perhaps use past exam questions. During learning, don't write things down word for word. Rather listen or read a section and then write down what you think you need to know in your own words. Write notes reliant on key words. See where your learning links in with other things you know. Look at your brainstorm concept map. Is it right? What can you add to it? After learning, tidy up your notes. Has your learning told you what you needed? Rewrite your network of key information. Can you put your notes away and answer those questions that you identified at the start? Can you explain what you learned to someone else? Here is a great role for a study group. There are some tricks to making learning active. These principally revolve around the concept of learning by doing. Making notes is an example, and making notes in such a way that when you come to review them, you will do more than just read them is a particularly useful technique which will be discussed in the next few sections. Whatever method you use, think about your learning and ensure that it is active learning. Making notes, the key principle, keywords, just about all effective note taking, whether from books or lectures, whether conventional or more modern approaches, depends on the concept of keywords. A keyword is a word or short phrase that sums up a sentence or an idea. The keyword itself should remind you of the content of that sentence or idea, and so keywords are personal. Your keywords may not be the same as mine, depending on our different prior knowledge, although usually there is common ground. Keywords give enough information to trigger recall. This paragraph can be summarized with the four keywords represented in figure 2.4. If you look at these keywords after reading the paragraph above, you should be able to recall what it was about. I haven't included word or short phrase as I know that about keywords already. Notice that if you hadn't read that paragraph, the keywords might not be that useful, so keywords aid recall of something that you have read or heard but are not that useful as a starting point. Books of lists are popular with medical students, and these are basically someone else's list of keywords. Trying to memorize these lists really doesn't help learning despite whatever the introduction to the book says. Figure 2.4 key phrases. Keywords, effective note taking, trigger recall, personal. Where keywords come into their strength is when you have made them yourself. You can summarize and remind yourself of huge chunks of text. Books or lectures with one or two keywords, and when revising and reviewing your notes, these prompts should help you recall the main points. If they don't, you will need to glance at the book or lecture slides and you will very quickly say or yes. If you are new to keywords, learning to make them can be quite difficult. You will need to practice and to review how you are progressing on a regular basis. Start with texts and lectures that are not too heavy on facts and figures. Clearly trying to make keywords from a book of lists would not be a good start. Try and summarize a chapter of this book with keywords, and then after a day, see if the keywords remind you enough of the content for you to explain it to someone else. Go back to the keywords that didn't help and see if you need them or if you can rephrase them to work better for you. With a little practice, making keywords becomes second nature. For a book like this, a keyword or two for each paragraph is probably about right. This paragraph might be summarized by easy with deliberate practice, which reminds me not only that it is easy with practice, but that also practice is required, and deliberate practice to me means practice where I think about how I am learning while I practice. SQ3R. The SQ3R is quite time consuming if you do it properly and may be challenging if you have a high workload, but it does give some good general principles. For all note taking, first survey the topic, have a look at reading lists, past exam papers, perhaps look at subheadings in a textbook. Next question, why are you reading this? What do you want to get out of it? How will you know when you know enough? Read to understand, a paragraph at a time, without making notes. Next, read to take notes, and finally review whether the notes do the job. The useful principles with this model are that reading around a subject and actively thinking about what your learning needs to give you will make your learning active, provide you structure in your learning, and should help you to build new learning on top of your prior knowledge. The Cornell method of taking notes. The Cornell method is a really simple modification of classical note-taking too. Make the note-taking and subsequent reviewing of those notes into active learning. It was developed by Walter Koch in the 1950s, and it is now widely used internationally. The secret is N, the preparation. Before you start making notes, before the lecture, or before you sit down with a book, take your blank paper and draw three lines. Draw a line across the top of the page so that you have dedicated space for a title. Draw a line across the page separating the bottom quarter. You will use this as a summary later, and finally draw a line down the left hand side about 5 centimeters from the left. Write your notes in the main body of the page, title area, Q column for lecture notes, summary space. After the lecture or when you close the book, look through your notes and tidy them up. Then on the left-hand column, write in the key words or prompts or summary points that will help you recall the notes that you took. Finally, at the bottom of the page, write a one-sentence summary of what the page is all about. This method is particularly useful in two respects. First, it makes you review your notes and makes sure you understand them. The reviewing, summarizing, and bringing out key concepts makes your learning active. The second thing it enables is easy active revision. When revising, just cover up the right hand side of the notes with a piece of rough paper. Look at each summary. Point on the left and write on the rough paper the details that link to that point. When you have done that for all the summary points, check your rough paper against the underlying notes what is missing. Of course, you can adapt the Cornell method to the task at hand and to your preferred learning. Perhaps you can use the summary space to write a handful of short answer questions. Then when revising, you can give them a go without looking at the notes. Then look at the summary points in the queue column. Do you want to add anything to your answers? Then look at the notes on the right. What did you leave out? Concept mapping. The belief that knowledge is linked within memory makes the idea of concept maps rather appealing. Concept maps are diagrammatic representations of networks of related knowledge. Each node in a concept map is a keyword, and each linkage has a direction and an annotation that describes the relationship between keywords. A concept map of this section so far might look something like figure 2.5. Concept maps are useful when they are complex interacting facts and to provide overviews of otherwise rather murky terrain. I know academics who keep all their references for academic papers in concept maps so that they can see at a glance what papers to look for when researching a particular topic. You can draw concept maps by hand or use software for doing it. Generic software such as Microsoft PowerPoint and Word can build simple concept maps using the drawing and connector tools. There are also dedicated software packages. Electronic concept maps are particularly useful for brainstorming as they allow you to rearrange concepts easily. Mind maps. Mind maps, a term coined by Tony Buzan, are a type of hierarchical concept map that makes use of color and imagery. They use keywords in a tree-like structure and encourage the writer to use as much of their imagination as possible. Figure 2.6 shows you one of two mind maps I have written on note-taking. The actual content is not important, but you can see the use of imagery that helps me remember the different areas and their content. The main challenge in making mind maps is that it is difficult to guess where to place the main stems. Often you will find that you didn't leave enough space for one or two of the sections. When making mind maps from books, the general structure is reasonable to guess in advance from the subheadings and size of the various subsections. In lectures, this is more tricky. Although at the start of the presentation, the lecturer might well give some structure. Figure 2.5, a concept map. Make your mind map on A3 and don't get too stressed if you have to go on to another piece of paper. Spend 10 minutes at the end of the lecture or some other time that day in a spare moment to rewrite your mind map as a best version. The rewriting will help it fit more logically to the page and will help you review what you learned. You might decide that you don't need everything that you wrote down or that there is an area that looks a bit sparse and might need some additional bookwork to fill out. Mind maps are personal things. They are best handwritten and annotated. Use colors and images that mean something to you. When revising, take a blank sheet of paper and see how much you can draw out again. Then look at your original map and see what you missed. Use active techniques to revise. There is too much on a complex mind map for you to learn just by looking at it. Figure 2.6 mind maps. Similarly, there are books of mind maps for medicine that you can buy. These are usually little more than lists arranged in a tree structure. The three benefits of mind maps for learning are first that you learn by creating them, by coloring them, by thinking what images might help you remember, and second, that they are personal to you. Tony Busan's book Use Your Head gives an excellent general guide to learning and covers mind maps in a lot more detail. Cue cards. You can buy various size cue cards from most stationers. These are perfect if you tend to feel overloaded when revising. Make summary notes onto cue cards, one card, one topic. Imagine a card on myocardial infarction. It could include keywords summarizing features on history, examination, special investigations, treatment, complications, and pathology. You can carry it with you and try and remember what is on it in spare moments and then check to see if you were right. You could do the same for many core conditions and either review them in turn or, when you are confident, choose one at random. Perhaps ask a friend to select a card at random and test you. Tables. Constructing tables is a fantastic way of summarizing data. Let's think about respiratory examination. There are 20 or so steps to the examination and 10 or so common clinical diagnoses, each with a different pattern of findings. Making a table with findings down one side and conditions across the top is great for highlighting the different findings between different conditions. Making tables is very useful for summarizing and understanding, but just looking at tables, perhaps in a book, is much less useful. Imagine the example. Above, it will have 200 bits of information in it, far too much to absorb by looking at it. If you want to revise a table, take a blank piece of paper and try and write it out again. The right tools for the right job. You might be feeling frustration from this chapter. Hang on, which is the best way of making notes? The answer is very much it depends. The best way depends on the task in hand and your personal preference. For some tasks, Cornell will be the best option. For others, a table might be best. If you are a visual person, then you might tend to have a preference for mind maps. If you are more of a words person, then you might lean more towards cue cards. It is important to know that it takes up to 3 months to become slick at any new way of learning. If these concepts above are new to you, introduce them one at a time. Start with keywords, then when you are finding it easy to find the right keywords, perhaps try mind maps or concept mapping for a couple of months. Keep a log of which methods seem to work for which tasks. Once you have mastered several methods, you will notice that you start using the most appropriate method automatically. Learning environments, learning from lectures. Some medical schools remain predominantly lecture based, whereas others use mostly small group work. All schools will use lectures at one time or another, and making the most out of them will help you a great deal. Preparation is important, although many students find the organization required challenging. Reading up on the topic before the lecture will help you understand the topic much more deeply. Imagine if the far extreme that you spent 20 minutes before the lecture making some notes on the topic of the lecture using a leading text. You leave plenty of spaces in your notes, and anything that you don't understand after reading it twice, you just leave space. In the lecture, you sit back and listen, annotate your notes, and fill in the gaps. You can work from your notes and concentrate on understanding. You could prepare the night before or even get in a bit early and prepare over a coffee. Perhaps a more realistic alternative is that you spend 5 minutes the night before a lecture looking at the objectives of the lecture and then just scribbling down the main subheadings from the relevant section of a textbook. That way you might well trigger some prior knowledge, and in the lecture you will have a good idea of where the lecture is going. I used to think that just being there was enough only when I talked to some friends after a lecture did I realize that I hadn't picked up as much as their Bruce first year medical student. During the lecture, make sure that all your paper is labeled clearly with the lecture and the date. You will thank yourself 6 months later when you drop. Your file and paper goes everywhere. Think about where you want to sit in the lecture theater. Aim to sit somewhere where you will have to concentrate and where distractions will be at a minimum. If your friends tend to talk to you or distract you in other ways, save their company for the breaks and sit away from them in lectures. If they object, tell them that you must be stupid or something because you really need to concentrate hard to understand lectures. Buy them a coffee and they will forgive you. Pay particular attention to the lecturer signposting important points or transitions between different parts of the lecture. Listen for importantly. Don't forget in summary the key point that I want to make is write your notes in your own words and use keywords and bullet points as appropriate. Concentrate on writing down your understanding rather than the words on the slides. Use emphasis in your notes, boxes and arrows, pictures and colors. Highlight key points and ensure that the headings are clear. Box or circle any new words and their definitions. After the lecture, tidy up your notes. Think about how this lecture fits in with other learning that you have had. You might even combine several different lecture notes if there is substantial overlap. The importance is that you can understand and apply what you have learned, not that you can regurgitate one particular lecturer's presentation. Once in a while, you will have a terrible lecture. It will be all over the place, hard to follow, and it will come with a handout that has had all headings removed to save space. You will be tempted to spend hours trying to make sense of it all. Don't bother. Look at the objectives for the lecture and just open an appropriate book. Imagine the clinical lecture on infertility was impossible to follow. Just open a book on gynecology for general practice and look at the infertility section. It will give a good overview. When you understand the topic, if you really want to, then is the time to look back at the lecture. Hopefully, this won't happen often, but it is important to be aware that if you are finding a lecture impossible to follow, it might not be your fault and it might be a good indicator that you should use another source for your learning from books. The same principles apply to learning from books as learning from lectures. Be attentive to your surroundings and possible distractions. If you are at home, turn the TV and radio off and put a do not disturb sign on the door. If you are working in the library, you might choose a seat that faces a wall too. Avoid watching the world go by. It is probably best to make notes of one form or another depending on the task in hand. Don't, whatever happens, just copy out chunks of text unless you think about what you are reading. How will you learn it? Some people will just sit and read books, others annotate the pages, but the trouble with that is that first the temptation is to think you are studying when you are in fact just looking at the page, and second, when you come to revise, you will have a whole mass of reading to do all over again. With deliberate reflective practice, your notes should become a distillation of the key points with an emphasis on the areas that you think are important and that you personally think you might have difficulty remembering. Then, this way, your notes will be different from the books and will be different from another student's notes on the same subject. As discussed previously, making notes is not good enough on its own. They need to be useful notes. You need to review them at a regular basis, and when you review them, you need to be learning actively, learning from the internet. Here's an exercise. Go to your favorite internet search engine and type in George Bush is an alien. If you use quotation marks, you will only find that exact phrase. You will find plenty of evidence that it's true. George Bush is an alien. Similarly, HIV is not sexually transmitted, and radiation is good for you. The internet is therefore full of misinformation, interspersed with some high quality information. Working out which category the information you find fits into can be challenging. Every medical student should receive training on finding reliable information on the internet. If you haven't, that is precisely the sort of request that will bring your medical librarian to tears of joy. There are some websites that give guidance on how to evaluate other websites for accuracy. One is www.quick.org.uk, which gives advice aimed at secondary schools, but is equally valid for the rest of us. Another, http://www.discern.org.uk divided by, gives a questionnaire specifically aimed at evaluating health-related websites. You will find some portals, websites that act as gateways to other high-quality sites. www.doctors.org. The student BMJ and BMA learning are just three of many examples. Websites that have a clearly described peer review process are likely to provide more reliable information than others. Finding that review article. The web does, of course, provide a quick way of identifying high quality articles from peer-reviewed journals. Some of these articles may be of particular use to you, and these will include educational articles and review articles. Educational articles are those which are designed to refresh doctors and often provide great overviews on topics. The BMJ, for example, publishes a 10-minute consultation series and masterclass for GPs series and will provide you with a good overview of the clinical aspects and especially clinical skills required for the diagnosis of a condition. Review articles review the published literature and provide an up-to-date summary of the current understanding of a disease, condition, or treatment. The principal free portal to such peer-reviewed journals is PubMed, which can be found at www.pubmed.org. It is worth playing with this website early in your studies at medical school, as an advanced understanding of how to use it will benefit you a great deal at all stages of your career. Particularly useful at your stage will be the limits tab. Imagine that you are reading about headache. Putting headache into the PubMed search field will retrieve over 40 articles, most of very little interest to you. Now use the limits tab and put in the following limits. Articles published in the last year. English language core clinical journals. Under type of article, click both practice guideline and review. Now hit the go button and you will be offered recent English language articles from the core clinical journals that review the literature or give guidelines. For practice, choose one or two of these and have a read. If you use information from the article in an essay or your notes, make sure you reference it appropriately. More details about referencing and plagiarism can be found in Chapter 6, and your medical library will be able to give you further information, advice, and training. It is worthwhile learning how to reference appropriately as soon as possible, as this is a skill that you will use throughout your career and you can get into sticky water if you don't know the rules. Summary: learning knowledge is essential for a career in medicine. Learning is an active process that requires effort and engagement. Learning how to learn, just as with any other skill, needs practice, experimentation, and reflection. Different sorts of knowledge and different sources of knowledge may require different approaches to learning. Questions and answers. Question: how do I know when I know enough? Answer: buried in this chapter are a number of strategies. You can consult curricula. Look at the contents of thin undergraduate books. Practice past papers. Write your own questions. Having read about diabetes, would I be able to explain it to a patient? Let me practice on a friend and see, and perhaps most importantly, study with others in your year and compare your depth and breadth of understanding with theirs. We discuss more on the pros and cons of collaborative learning in Chapter 5. Question: what is the point of making notes when I never look at them again? Answer: exactly. You need to build time into your schedule to review notes regularly. Think about the review when you are writing the notes and plan to make the reviewing as active as possible, perhaps by writing questions or setting tasks that if you can complete will tell you that you know the topic. Question: my flatmate never does any work and he does really well in his exams. Answer: odds are that he studies harder than he admits. Perhaps he just crams for his exams, in which case he will not remember much of what he learned once. The exams are over. Do you want him looking after your mother if he qualifies? Why not aim to work harder and become a better doctor? When he fails, he will appreciate your support. Question: is this chapter saying that I need to study all the time? Answer: yes and no. You need to be prepared to study over and above the 9 to 5 of the working week. This is the reality of a career as a doctor, and if you just want a 9 to 5 job with great evenings and weekends, you need to take some careers. Advice: clearly you need a good balance between study and recreation, and if you are studying all evening every evening, you are doing something wrong. We think that getting the balance right is so important that we have committed a whole chapter to the topic. Question: writing notes takes ages. Wouldn't it be better just to read the book? Answer: if you are just starting out making notes, it will take time and effort to improve in speed and accuracy. Think about the words and abbreviations that you use. Are you making best use of keywords, headings, drawings? Review your notes. Are they too detailed? Have you perhaps just copied out chunks of text because it is easier than thinking? Good notes will help you review and revise topics quickly and easily and should guarantee active learning. Your university will run study skills workshops on how to make notes if you continue to have trouble. Why not book into one?